In the late 15th century, England was not a great power. It was not rich. It was not feared. It was a small, war-torn island recovering from decades of civil war. But from this island would rise an empire that would one day rule a quarter of the planet. The year is 1485. The Battle of Bosworth Field ends the bloody Wars of the Roses. A new dynasty, the Tudors, seizes the throne. Henry VII becomes king. He brings peace, stability, and a cautious ambition. England's treasury is empty, its nobility broken, but the country begins to breathe again. Across the sea, something extraordinary is happening. Spain and Portugal are sailing beyond the known world. Christopher Columbus has just reached the Americas. Vasco da Gama is sailing to India. A new age has begun, the age of discovery, and England is about to join the race. Henry VII's reign, 1485 to 1509, quietly lays the groundwork. He sponsors John Cabot, an Italian navigator who, in 1497, reaches the coast of Newfoundland, the first English claim in the New World. It is a small beginning, but history is built on such small steps. Henry VIII succeeds his father in 1509, bold, ambitious, obsessed with power and prestige. He strengthens the navy, builds new warships like the Mary Rose, and declares himself Lord of the Seas. But his focus is on the continent, wars with France, rivalry with Spain, not empire. Then comes Elizabeth I, ascending the throne in 1558. England is poor, divided, and surrounded by powerful enemies. Spain, under Philip II, dominates the world with its vast American colonies. France controls great lands in Europe. England, a minor island with dreams larger than its means. But Elizabeth brings something new, vision and courage. She understands that England's future lies not in continental wars, but upon the oceans. "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman," she declares, "but I have the heart and stomach of a king." Under Elizabeth, England's ambitions find their champions, the so-called sea dogs. Men like Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh, and John Hawkins. They are sailors, merchants, and pirates all at once, loyal to their queen but hungry for profit. Drake circumnavigates the globe between 1577 and 1580, plundering Spanish ships, raiding colonies, and returning to England with a fortune. Elizabeth knights him on the deck of his ship, the Golden Hind. By sea, not by land, shall England's greatness be won. Raleigh dreams of colonies in the New World. He founds the ill-fated Roanoke colony in 1585, the Lost Colony. Though it vanishes mysteriously, it ignites a powerful idea. England can build its own world overseas. By the 1580s, tensions with Spain reach a breaking point. English privateers attack Spanish treasure fleets. Protestant England supports rebels in the Spanish Netherlands. The mighty Spanish Armada sets sail in 1588. A massive fleet meant to invade and crush England once and for all. But fate and weather have other plans. The English Navy, smaller but faster, uses fire ships and long-range cannons. Storms in the North Sea do the rest. The Armada is scattered and destroyed. England has survived and the world has noticed. For the first time, the tiny island kingdom has defeated the greatest empire of its age. Elizabeth stands triumphant. God blew, and they were scattered. The defeat of the Armada marks more than victory. It marks the birth of ambition. England now believes it has a destiny across the seas. Merchants and adventurers form trading companies, the Muscovy Company, the Levant Company, and most importantly, in 1600, the East India Company. What begins as a business venture will one day become an empire. An empire not born from conquest but from commerce, at least at first. When Elizabeth I dies in 1603, she leaves behind a nation transformed. Its navy is strong. Its merchants are bold. Its explorers dream of lands beyond the horizon. The empire does not yet exist, but its shadow is already visible on the waves. Closing narration of Part 1. Emotional music builds. From the ashes of civil war, a nation has found its purpose. From the coasts of England, a new world calls. And soon the English flag will fly on distant shores, from America to India, from Africa to the Pacific. The age of exploration has ended. The age of empire has begun. At the dawn of the 17th century, England was a nation on the edge, recovering from civil strife, ambitious but fragile. While Spain and Portugal ruled vast overseas empires, England had only dreams, merchants, and a few daring sailors to stake its claim. Yet ambition, once kindled, could not be contained. 1607. A fleet of 3 ships, the Susan Constant, Godspeed, and Discovery, carried 104 men across the Atlantic. Their destination, the wild, uncharted shores of Virginia. This would be the first permanent English colony in America. The challenges were immense. Dense forests, unknown terrain, diseases like dysentery and malaria, and conflicts with the Powhatan Confederacy. Within the first year, over half of the settlers perished. Yet Jamestown endured largely due to the cultivation of tobacco. John Rolfe introduced a high-quality strain which became a profitable export to England, providing the colony with economic survival and, more importantly, a template for future English settlements. Key point: Jamestown was not merely a settlement. It was the first test of England's overseas resilience, learning to navigate logistics, diplomacy with native peoples, and economic survival. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, England's eyes turned toward the sugar-rich Caribbean. Colonies in Barbados, Antigua, and Jamaica would transform from mere outposts to lucrative economic engines. Sugar cultivation was brutally labor-intensive. Enslaved Africans were brought via the triangular trade: European goods to Africa, enslaved people to the Caribbean, sugar and tobacco back to Europe. The colonies were profitable, but human suffering was staggering. This duality, commerce and cruelty, would become a defining characteristic of the empire. Subtle note: this early economic foundation in the Caribbean fueled the capital and naval power that allowed England to expand further into Asia and Africa. 1600 marked a pivotal moment: the chartering of the East India Company. Initially a trading corporation, it carried England's ambitions to India, establishing ports at Surat, Madras, and later Calcutta. Trade goods, spices, textiles, indigo, and later tea flowed back to England. But commerce carried power. Local rulers and European rivals became entwined in complex diplomacy, skirmishes, and alliances. By the mid-17th century, the company had not only secured trade monopolies but had begun to exercise political influence, foreshadowing colonial domination. Key insight: the East India Company represents the merging of capitalism and empire, where private enterprise laid the groundwork for imperial control. Religious persecution shaped migration. Puritans fled England for Massachusetts in 1620 aboard the Mayflower, seeking freedom from Anglican constraints. Quakers and other sects sought refuge in Pennsylvania. Religion influenced law, governance, and daily life in these colonies. These settlements emphasized literacy, self-governance, and civic responsibility, inadvertently sowing seeds for political evolution, principles that would echo in the revolutions and governance structures of later English colonies. England's colonies did not exist in isolation. France, the Netherlands, and Spain maintained competing territories. Tensions led to small wars, privateer raids, and territorial disputes. In North America, the English expanded along the Atlantic coast, while French influence dominated Canada and the St. Lawrence Valley. In the Caribbean, English and Dutch traders clashed over sugar plantations and ports. Every colony became a strategic chess piece in global power politics. Even before India and full-scale colonization, England's involvement in Africa intensified. Trading posts in West Africa facilitated the slave trade, with forts at Elmina and Cape Coast serving as hubs. The empire's economic foundation increasingly relied on human labor extracted across continents, a stark reminder of the moral complexities behind England's rise. By 1700, England's overseas presence stretched from North America to the Caribbean, and trading posts in India and Africa. Each colony, each port was a thread in a growing web of influence. Commerce, ambition, and resilience were tested repeatedly. Jamestown taught survival, the Caribbean taught profit and cruelty, India taught diplomacy and subtle power. Together, they formed the blueprint of an empire that would dominate the 18th century. Closing narration of Part 2. Music swells to epic. The first colonies were laboratories of power. They revealed the strengths and weaknesses of an empire in the making. From tobacco plantations to spice markets, England had taken its first decisive steps toward becoming a global force. Next, the stage would shift to war, conquest, and expansion. The world would see the British Empire rise from ambition to dominion. By the dawn of the 18th century, the British Empire had survived its first colonies, but survival was no longer enough. Expansion, power, and dominance now defined its ambition. From Europe to India, from the Caribbean to North America, England was about to enter an era of war, commerce, and global influence, an age that would define the empire for generations. Europe was a chessboard of dynastic conflicts. The death of Charles II of Spain triggered a major war over succession, drawing England, France, Austria, and the Dutch Republic into a complex struggle. The British, under the Duke of Marlborough, achieved decisive victories at Blenheim and Ramillies. These battles were not just European affairs. Control over trade and colonies in the Americas and Asia was at stake. Key insight: military success in Europe translated into colonial advantage. Britain gained Gibraltar, Minorca, and trading rights in the Americas. The Royal Navy became the backbone of British expansion. Powerful ships, disciplined sailors, and privateers like Woodes Rogers challenged Spanish and French dominance. Privateering blurred the line between commerce and warfare, allowing England to profit from enemy trade while strengthening its naval supremacy. Subtle note: this era established Britain as the preeminent sea power, a status that would enable later colonial dominance in India, Africa, and North America. By mid-century, the British colonies in North America flourished. Cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and Charleston became centers of trade, shipbuilding, and culture. Tobacco, sugar, and cotton exports strengthened the empire's economy, while new settlers continued to arrive from Europe seeking opportunity or religious freedom. Key insight: economic growth in the colonies fueled naval and military capabilities at home, reinforcing England's global reach. The East India Company evolved from a trading corporation to a political and military power in India. Battles like Plassey, 1757, and Buxar, 1764, demonstrated that trade, diplomacy, and military might could be fused to control vast territories. By the end of the 18th century, the company exercised de facto sovereignty over Bengal, collecting taxes, maintaining armies, and influencing local rulers. Subtle note: this was a new model of empire, commercial entities wielding political authority, foreshadowing modern corporate influence in global affairs. The 18th century was defined by constant rivalry. French colonies in Canada, the Caribbean, and India posed continuous threats. Wars like the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, became truly global, fought in Europe, North America, Africa, and Asia. Victory in these conflicts allowed Britain to acquire Canada, Florida, and key trading ports in India, consolidating its empire like never before. Key insight: global warfare shaped empire building. Every victory abroad translated into territorial, economic, and political gains. Expansion was not just military. Mercantilism and trade monopolies ensured that wealth flowed to Britain, funding the navy, government, and further expansion. British culture, language, law, and commerce began to spread across continents. a subtle but enduring influence that would outlast even the empire itself. Subtle note: while war and conquest dominated headlines, trade and administration quietly built the infrastructure of empire. By 1800, the British Empire had become a truly global force. Its colonies, trading posts, and naval supremacy stretched from the Americas to India and Africa. This was an empire forged in war, sustained by trade, and guided by ambition. The foundations were set for the 19th century, the era of industrial growth, imperial consolidation, and global dominance. The 19th century dawned with smoke rising from factory chimneys, steam engines roaring, and the clatter of progress echoing across the British Isles. England had transformed from a maritime empire into an industrial giant. Its colonies were no longer distant outposts. They were the lifeblood of a global economic and political network that stretched across continents. Coal, iron, and steam powered an unprecedented transformation. Factories churned out textiles, machinery, and weapons. Railways connected cities, and steamships shrank oceans, enabling faster movement of goods and troops. The Industrial Revolution didn't just enrich England, it amplified its imperial reach. Mechanized production fed colonies with goods and drew raw materials from distant lands, from Indian cotton to Caribbean sugar. Key insight: industrialization turned Britain into the workshop of the world, giving it economic, technological, and military leverage over rival empires. By mid-19th century, the British Empire was the largest in history, spanning India, Australia, Africa, Canada, the Caribbean, and Southeast Asia. India, often called the jewel in the crown, provided enormous wealth, resources, and strategic advantage. The colonies in Africa and the Pacific were gradually absorbed, often through treaties, wars, and diplomacy. Subtle note: empire at this stage was not just territorial. It was a network of governance, commerce, and culture binding distant lands to London. Steamships, telegraphs, and railways created a web of global trade. Tea, spices, cotton, and manufactured goods moved at unprecedented speeds. London became the financial hub of the world, and the pound sterling became the first truly global currency. Key insight: economic domination underpinned military and political power. Britain's global influence was now as much financial as territorial. Empire building was never uncontested. The Opium Wars in China, 1839 to 1860, forced trade concessions and expanded influence, while the Zulu and Sepoy uprisings demonstrated resistance to British rule. Diplomacy, alliances, and sometimes brutal suppression maintained Britain's global supremacy, balancing power between European rivals and local powers in Asia and Africa. The 19th century also witnessed the export of British science, engineering, education, and law. Telegraph lines, canals, and lighthouses were constructed in colonies, spreading British knowledge and infrastructure. Subtle note: cultural influence often outlasted territorial control, embedding language, law, and institutions long after empire receded. By the late 1800s, Britain ruled over a quarter of the world's population. Its flag flew across oceans, its economy dictated global markets, and its navy dominated the seas. Yet, this dominance came with challenges: rising nationalism in colonies, competition from industrializing Germany and the United States, and moral questions over imperialism. Key insight: the empire's strength lay in its integration of industrial, military, economic, and administrative power, a model of global dominance unmatched in history. The 19th century was the pinnacle of British imperial power, an empire built on industry, trade, innovation, and ambition. Its legacy shaped the modern world, setting the stage for the revolutions, conflicts, and transformations of the 20th century. The 20th century dawned with promise, but shadows loomed over the British Empire. By 1900, it had reached the peak of its territorial extent. Yet unseen storms of war, nationalism, and economic strain were gathering. The world would soon witness conflicts that tested the empire's resilience, sowed the seeds of resistance, and marked the beginning of its gradual decline. When Europe plunged into war in 1914, Britain mobilized not only its own population but millions from across its colonies: India, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Africa, and the Caribbean. The war was total. Soldiers fought in trenches from the Western Front to Mesopotamia, while colonial economies were strained to supply resources, food, and military goods. Key insight: the empire's involvement showcased its global reach, but also exposed its vulnerabilities. Overextension, logistical challenges, and growing colonial discontent. Subtle note: millions of colonial soldiers fought and died, igniting early nationalist sentiments and demands for recognition and rights post-war. After the war, promises of self-determination made by Britain to colonies often went unfulfilled. India's demand for independence gained momentum under leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru. Ireland's struggle led to the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921, creating the Irish Free State, while nationalist movements in Africa and the Middle East began organizing more forcefully. Key insight: the interwar period revealed that maintaining an empire through military power alone was no longer sustainable. Political concessions and reforms became essential. Subtle note: the League of Nations, though flawed, became a platform for colonial issues and highlighted the growing international awareness of imperialism's moral dilemmas. The Great Depression, 1929 to 1939, hit Britain hard. Industrial output fell, trade slowed, and colonies faced economic hardships, fueling discontent. Britain tried to stabilize its empire through trade preferences, new taxes, and reforms, but resistance was growing. Across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean, movements for independence began linking economic grievances with political demands. Key insight: economic vulnerability demonstrated that empire could no longer rely solely on past wealth and territorial control. Social and political legitimacy became crucial. When Nazi Germany and its allies challenged Europe, Britain once again drew on the full strength of its empire. Soldiers, laborers, and resources flowed from India, Africa, Canada, and Australia. Colonial participation was immense. Indian soldiers alone numbered over 2 million, while African and Caribbean troops contributed significantly to both combat and logistical operations. Key insight: the war underscored the global dependence of Britain on its colonies, yet simultaneously accelerated anti-colonial sentiments. Colonies realized their critical importance and demanded rights and independence post-war. Subtle note: the devastation of European infrastructure, coupled with the rise of the United States and the Soviet Union as superpowers, left Britain weakened economically and politically, no longer able to maintain empire at its previous scale. By 1945, the British Empire was at a crossroads. India's independence movement had reached a climax, and plans for post-war governance needed to address the growing unrest in Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. The war had demonstrated that Britain could no longer impose control through force alone. Political negotiation, reform, and gradual independence became the inevitable path. Key insight: world wars acted as catalysts. Colonies contributed massively to the imperial war effort, and in return, demanded political recognition, setting the stage for the wave of decolonization in the mid-20th century. The era of unquestioned British dominance was over. From the trenches of Europe to the streets of Delhi and Dublin, the empire had been tested, stretched, and challenged. By 1945, the British Empire had survived 2 world wars, but it was weakened politically and economically. The stage was set for independence, resistance, and a new global order, marking the beginning of the end for the empire that had once ruled a quarter of the world. By 1947, the British Empire had ruled a quarter of the world's population for centuries. But the age of empire was ending. From the crowded streets of Delhi to the plains of Africa, nations were rising, demanding self-determination, freedom, and sovereignty. August 15, 1947 marked the end of British rule in India. The subcontinent was divided into India and Pakistan, a process that led to massive migrations and tragic violence. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah had guided movements combining political negotiation, mass civil disobedience, and moral authority. Key insight: India's independence set a global precedent. Colonies realized that long-standing imperial powers could be challenged successfully. Subtle note: the economic, social, and administrative structures left behind by Britain became both assets and challenges for newly independent nations. From the 1950s through the 1970s, African nations gained independence one by one. Ghana, 1957, Nigeria, 1960, Kenya, 1963, and beyond. In the Caribbean, nations like Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago became independent by the 1960s, often transitioning peacefully through negotiation and constitutional reforms. Key insight: decolonization was influenced by rising nationalism, global political shifts, and the weakening of Britain's military and economic capacity post-World War II. Subtle note: the process varied. Some nations faced violent struggle, others negotiated settlements. Yet all inherited political, legal, and educational frameworks shaped by Britain. Britain's presence in the Middle East and Southeast Asia diminished gradually. Colonies, protectorates, and mandates such as Palestine, Malaya, and Burma moved toward independence. The Suez Crisis, 1956, revealed Britain's reduced global clout, especially in the face of superpowers like the United States and the Soviet Union. Key insight: the decline of direct political control coincided with strategic influence. Britain maintained economic and cultural links even after formal empire ended. Former colonies became members of the British Commonwealth, a voluntary association promoting political cooperation, trade, and cultural ties. English language, legal systems, parliamentary governance, and educational structures provided continuity and a shared framework among diverse nations. Subtle note: while sovereignty was restored, Britain retained influence through diplomacy, trade, and cultural institutions, a modern evolution of imperial legacy. Even after formal empire ended, Britain's impact remained. Financial networks centered in London, global media and education systems, scientific and technological collaborations, and cultural exports continued to shape the world. Key insight: the empire's legacy is complex. A mixture of infrastructure, governance models, cultural influence, and economic networks, alongside histories of exploitation and resistance. From the heights of territorial domination to the struggles of independence, the British Empire transformed global politics, economies, and societies. Its story is one of ambition, innovation, conflict, and resilience. A narrative whose echoes still resonate in modern international relations, law, language, and culture. The empire may have ended, but its influence endures. Nations once under its rule now stand independent, shaping their own destinies, yet connected by a shared history. From colonies to Commonwealth, from industrial power to modern diplomacy, the British Empire's legacy remains one of the most profound forces in shaping the contemporary world. The story of the British Empire is a story of ambition, power, and lasting impact. A journey from the age of exploration to the post-colonial world.